Now, a wave of military coups in Africa is pushing the continent backward in terms of democracy. 6 military coups have occurred in Africa in less than 2 years, including 2 in Burkina Faso this year, 2 in Mali in 2020 and 2021, and another in Guinea last year. Chad and Sudan also had military takeovers. However, the preponderance of these incidents occurred in West Africa, where the majority of countries are French colonies. Are African countries losing faith in democratic system? We have 2 guests right here in the studio. Musa Salmanu, he is a retired wing commander and also former United Nations expert on mission. And then also we have Ali M. Ali, a journalist and Deputy President, Nigeria Guild of Editors, in the studio to talk to us about this. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen.
Well, it's good to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Good morning.
Yeah. All right, well, let me start with you, Musa Salmanu. What, in your perspective, is the motivation for the recent coups that we've seen, sort of a resurgence in recent times?
Well, thank you so much. There could be so many reasons, but if we are going to say drive in or cascade into a few of them, you will find out that I think for me the most glaring reason is the fact that people are not, or governments, or those governments are losing the essence of governance itself. That is, the state is more than ever not able to play its own side of the bargain. What will I being, for example, you say that the most important or the primary responsibility of the state is to ensure the welfare and well-being of the people, in whatever language you put it, but that's the primary responsibility. If you look at those states, you find out that there are incidences where the state is not able to kind of carry out that responsibility. And that is manifested in terms of maybe economy, the security situation, political stability, and so on. They are interconnected, and so there grows a kind of a feeling of despondency among the populace, and the military, being what they are in those countries, read the public, demeanor, they read what the public feels, and so that gives them the impetus, or gives them the reason to say that, okay, they are intervening and so on. So basically you see that there are issues of insecurity, there are issues of economic hardship, there are issues of governance. In fact, drill to issues of governance. And the more the states or those countries are unstable, the more there are no, what we call here, dividends of democracy or any type of government. The more there are no dividends of democracy, the more the citizenry are feeling left out by the state, and the higher the propensity of that coup to happen.
Mr. Ali, my question is to you. 6 of the coups since 2019 to now have been in the Francophone countries. Why is that so?
Well, very good question. Why is that so? Well, my colleague here actually enumerated some of the reasons why there have been these democratic reverses, if you like, in especially West Africa. And of course, in the last couple of years, you've seen this reversal. Apart from the underlying uncertain economic conditions in these countries we've identified, and the nature of the former colonial master to intrude in the affairs in order to exert maximum control and influence. The nature of colonial domination differs remarkably between Francophone countries and Anglophone countries. If you notice that Anglophone West Africa especially, and indeed the whole of the continent, has been relatively stable democracy-wise. Now, this is where also you have to understand the nature and the psyche of French military. French-trained military. Notwithstanding of exception in some places, like Guinea, for example, the reason why the military stage a comeback in Guinea. There are different, reasons why some of this military intrusion again happen in this country. But you can't take away one fact about the psychology or how former French colonies, the military there, see themselves. They see themselves not just as protectors of this territorial integrity of this respective nation, but as one who have equal stake in the evolution of the maintenance of security in the states, economic prosperity. And unfortunately, most of these countries, like my colleague said, democratic francophone nation states have failed to meet the aspiration. Democracy proved not the luxury they expected. It did not bring the expected relief in matters of economy and social, if you like, deliverables, unfortunately. And the military there, they see themselves, like I say, as those also of equal stakeholders. They are yet to subordinate themselves. In the real sense of the word, they see themselves as stakeholders in the evolution of their state. Okay. And that's why they take every available opportunity to stage a comeback, and especially when they read the mood of the nation.
Okay, now to what extent do you think that the influence of former colonialists, such as France, for instance, has been responsible for what we are seeing in some of these francophone countries? Oftentimes we see that when these coups happen, the people seem to rejoice. They seem to rejoice, and then in some instances, you see rising suspicion and protest, this anti-France sentiment expressed by some of them, calling for more alliance with, say, Russia, for instance, and then to do away with France.
Well, you can't take away. You see the telltale involvement of France. France, like I said, has been meddlesome. And it has to do with the nature of the colonial domination over time. There is a marked difference between Anglophone countries, the nature of colonial domination, how it happened. They have indirect route. Most Anglophone countries actually, they had, the system used to dominate such countries was indirect route. But France, what it did was to see its former colony as an extension of France. So deep down is the psyche of post-colonial Africa nation states, how the rulers see themselves as an extension, especially in Francophone West Africa, as an extension of France, because they've been conditioned over time to think French.
Okay.
That is one.
So it doesn't seem like France as a former colony seemed to have moved away in its, or I would say changed the dynamics of a relationship with these Francophone countries, in the sense that it appears as though it continues to relate with these African countries, even though they are independent, continue to relate with them as though they are still colonies.
Exactly. And you can see that in the monetary policies. For example, virtually all of them, no exception here, French colonies, former French colonies, they still have their foreign reserve in the French.
Well, yes. Mr. Ali, as much as we want to blame the French people, don't you think that the leaders of those African countries provided the enabling environment for this intrusion, though?
No, you see, the thing is, like they say, you can take the kid away from the ghetto, but you can't take the ghetto away from the kid. It's a mind thing. Like I said, most post-colonial Francophone countries and notwithstanding self-rule, you understand, independence. But then those who administered the states over time in the last 62 years or so, when most African nation states became independent and flag independent. Till this day, even now in Anglophone countries, you still have this colonial attachment to past, if you like, oppressors in some places. For example, when the Queen passed away in Anglophone West Africa, in Nigeria, we had no business flying flag at half-mast. We went into overdrive because of this colonial attachment to a former colony. So in France, that is even more glaring. In Francophone countries, it's even more glaring because they see themselves, for example, as an extension of France. So and then even in their appearance, in their culture, if you go to Niger, for example, if you go to Burkina Faso, the language spoken there the mentality, the apparels is
Okay.
still somehow linked to the former colonial.
All right, so let me throw this to Musa Salmanu. It looks like we've been here before. I mean, the trend of coups, it looks like this is not the first time that we are experiencing this, even as a continent. I mean, if you go back decades ago, most African countries have had their fair share of coup, including Nigeria. And the reasons then were the same reasons that we're still seeing today, issues of welfare of the citizens. The military at the time, when juntas occur, they would say, well, the democratic system hasn't been able to deliver good governance, corruption, nepotism, and the likes, and all of that. But does the military actually have the answer to these issues?
Well, the simple answer is no. The military does not have the answer to this, because the military is just a subset of the entire society. Now, you have to understand the psychology with which the military come into these coups. Not trying to defend why there are coups, but the military by nature is a service that tries to make you feel very patriotic, to the extent that you feel that you owe everything to this country. You could give your life, which is the most precious for every human being. So now that drilling of patriotism in the person makes, if not directed to the best where it could be utilized for national development, could be negative, in the sense that there is that feeling that things are not going on well. There is that feeling that people that are supposed to go get these things done are not doing them well. And there is that issue of feeling that the military can do it better and faster. Now, that is what push that a lot of them. Of course, I'm not also not ignoring the fact that there are personal ambitions of people that come into the military. But like he said, that so it's the orientation that the military has. But over the years, there has been deliberate efforts, especially in the Anglophone part of it, to tell the military that you have to subordinate that ambition, that zeal, that determination, that patriotism to democratic control.
But would you say that the same motivation that drove the military decades ago to interject democratic dispensations is the same motivations that we are seeing now? There are experts who have said that the military have now become more and more political. It's now beginning to meddle more into political issues. So I'm saying this because if you look at the international dimension to this, there is this talk about Russia and France. I will always go back to that because there are accusing fingers right now between France and Russia, while France feel that the use of alleged mercenaries in these African countries are used as an excuse for France to find its way and perhaps have some ties with the African continent and all of that, and the likes. So those kind of arguments.
Mercenaries or private military corporations, or what the new names they give them, are not new in warfare. Private military contractors and so on. They are not new in warfare. They have been existing, and that's why the United Nations has completely banned. African Union has followed through, including, and so on. So they are not new in. But also there is a policy, or there is a new kind of lexicon that is coming in, is whereby the military in most countries, we have seen that in Iraq and in some other places, whereby you sublet some of the what you feel are not core responsibilities of the military to all those private military contractors. They're usually ex-military people. They come on board and they do some of those services again. But we are finding a situation whereby they do the fighting themselves. They are armed like state militaries. They do the fighting and they get involved. Now, in terms of the African countries where you're seeing, maybe is it the Russian group and so on, Russia is a latecomer to the game. If you remember that there were the executive outcomes in other conflicts in Africa and so on. So it's something that has been ongoing, and most of these countries, or the countries that are now saying that these countries should not use them, have actually in the past supported some of this by either directly or indirectly. So it's a lot of times is international politics, whereby you want to give, depending on who is championing that, you want to give them a bad name. I'm not saying that mercenaries are welcome, but private military contractors is a reality that has come to the theater of operations now. And what countries do, or a lot of them, is because of lack of capacity. When their national armies do not have the capacity and they need results, they result back to that.
All right, Mr. Ali.
Yeah.
I want us to look at the root cause of this. In Guinea, for instance, the crisis started when the president, Alpha Conde, wanted a third term. I mean, he threw a referendum, amended the constitution and all of that. In African countries, we've had countries where the constitution will be suspended. We have had countries where they don't even have limits, just because these leaders want to stay in office in perpetuity. Now, why do they want to stay in office in perpetuity when they don't want to deliver the goods? Because it is that lack of delivery that causes this, that brings about this interference by the military.
Well, it goes back maybe in history, if you like, and goes back to the days of the Cold War, when we had a bipolar world. And well, just briefly, let me just go back to what he said about the struggle for influence in Africa now, because Africa, again, unfortunately, has become the guinea pig again. As usual, there is a great scramble for Africa for the maybe third time now. After the great scramble in the 18th century, 19th century, now there is that resurgence of scramble for Africa, because it's still where most advanced countries is the source of raw material for whatever they want to fuel their industries. Now, and then what they say, the sit-tight mentality. The moment there is no rule, one of the cardinal objectives at the core of democracy is rule of law. And the moment you begin to tinker with constitutional provision, you're positioning yourself for a coup d'etat or an ouster. And especially if you fail to deliver dividend of democracy, if you fail to alter the pathetic narrative of most African nation states grappling with the usual hydra-headed problem, economic, if you like, challenges, social challenges, and now the latest one, which is insecurity, which since people make this reference with the collapse of especially Libya, and then there's been this intensifying insecurity, especially in the Sahel region, incidentally where most of this insecurity is happening, conflict, which has spanned to West Africa, is in the Sahel. After the death of Gaddafi, and then the armory of Libya was let loose on the continent. But coming back, the sit-tight mentality, anywhere, people argue that democracy, especially the one we seek to have, has not developed any economy. That even if you look at even the great economies, actually were a product of dictatorship. If you take India's, as recently as the rise of the Asian tigers, you look at Singapore, the Asian tigers, Indonesia, even Malaysia, is because we've had, look at even recently what is happening in Rwanda. Kigali, Paul Kagame has been there for like forever, literally.
We have Museveni too.
We have Museveni, but have their continuous stay in office translated into better deal for the citizens? That's the question people are asking now. If you're delivering what the West like to demonize, Vladimir Putin. He has been there. He has done a lot of constitutional reforms to bring himself, after being out of power, returning back. If you go to even Israel, what you have dynasties. You have you can say almost with certainty who between, what do you call these gentlemen who have been there in and out of office. But in Africa, And that's because it's Africa.
Okay.
First, leaders fail to deliver the dividends of democracy, and then they want to extend their tenure.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So let's maybe narrow in now. If you look at Chad, for instance, Idris Deby, Idno, the father of the current president now, has been the president for 30 years. He also became president by taking over, by the use of military might and force, coup, as we know it. And now, immediately after he was killed in battle, his son declared, I mean, his son literally led another coup and, emerged. And then there was a promise to transit to a democratic system in 18 months. But recently, we are seeing that there is an extension of that transition period, which it seemed like also a repetition of what happened, because the same thing happened with his father. And then he's also qualified to contest even after the transition period, for an office and all that. So the same goes back to the sit-tight thing. Isn't that part of the problem why we continue to have these conflicts? Because you have rebel groups that have continued to strike, because of these things.
They say those who are mindless of history are doomed to repeat it. You understand? And then also this transvestism is exactly at the core of the instability in most African nation states. This idea of I will remain. But then you have to also look at it. When you look at it, really, are they the ones actually making the decisions? Sometimes there is a master puppeteer somewhere because it will benefit the master puppeteer. People have made this allusion, academics especially, that look, decision in countries that have gone through the twin evil of colonialism and military rule often take orders or directives from
when you
outside.
talk about these master puppeteers, are you talking about the foreigners, the
colonial masters?
So why is it that African leaders are not able to liberate themselves? I mean, they are now independent, right? So why can't they work towards liberating themselves of this hold?
African leaders who made the attempt, we've seen that in the past, who made the attempt to be revolutionary, why did they end up? We've seen that with General Murtala Mohammed after the great speech in 1976. The speech of Africa has come of age. And that marked him for elimination. We've seen that with Thomas Sankara. We've seen that even with Libya, Muammar Gaddafi. All these things are coming to the fore after their demise. Now, how independent truly are African nation states? This is a question that perhaps is like, we may not easily get, it's not a yes or answer. There are instances where we've seen that happening. Those who do not want Africa to be totally independent, they have a cocktail of tricks, subterfuges they can use to incite internal rebellion within the government or incite the military takeover. And unfortunately, African leaders themselves, because of their failure to deliver on the dividends of democracy, also they prime themselves for this kind of
all right, so I would like for us to look at Burkina Faso, for instance. The first coup was just, barely 9 months ago, and then we are seeing another one. The reason for the first coup is the issue of insecurity and all of that. And the second coup, when it took place, the coup plotters said that, well, the first coup the leader of the first coup has not been able to bring stability in the country, and so they are striking as well. But now you have a military that is divided, because definitely the loyalists of the former coup leader will still be within the force and all that. What's the implication of that as to bring in stability in Burkina Faso?
Well, the implication is that you have a further weakened military because, like you alluded, the issue of insecurity was the basis for the first coup. However, between the first coup in January till now, this last coup, the incidence of insecurity or attacks has risen by almost 23%. And so you find out that it did not improve, it got worse. Now, now that there's an ouster again, there will be further division within the military because there are loyalists of the other regime, even though they seem to be a bit suppressed. You don't hear of the dissent and so on, but there is likely to be that. So it all depends on the ability of Captain Traore and his members of the regime, how they're able to kind of bring others out of the fold into the fold, through appointments or so on and so forth. Or then secondly, what grip he has over both in terms of politics, but also with the military. That would go a long way to see if they are fighting with one front. Then also, it will depend also a lot on the issue with such crisis. Also depends a lot with neighboring states. Now, if you find out, if you observe, the issue of Burkina Faso, unfortunately, is the issue of Mali. When there is a high rise of incidences in Mali, it affects Burkina Faso. When the same thing with Chad and so on. Like he said earlier, the whole idea from Libya, when the arsenal was let loose and everywhere, porous borders across these countries, and fighters that have allegiance, they don't recognize international borders, by the way. So they fight. If they are pursued from Mali, they come into Burkina Faso. If they are pursued from Central African Republic. So this is what happens when you have neighbors that are unstable, or you have a region that is unstable. It affects all countries. So, and that is why you have to kind of give thumbs up to the efforts of the Lake Chad Basin Commission through the Multinational Joint Task Force. Because you cannot fight this war alone. Until your neighbors are also secured, until you have an agreement with your neighbors in a way that they will not allow fighters from your own country to have a sanctuary in their countries, you're going to have a big problem. When you pursue them, they cross international borders, and they don't recognize international borders. If they have sanctuary in the other countries, it's just a matter of time. They hibernate, they come back and attack. So the issue with Burkina Faso is that it all depends on the outlook. We have seen that he's already reaching out. He said he has partners, and he wants more partners, which is people are interpreting that to mean that he's trying to shift slightly away from France to more of Russia, just like we've seen with the citizens and so on and so forth. So if that happens, it all depends on what support they're able to get. It depends on the cohesion within the military. It depends on the support also by the citizenry themselves. And that zeal, because there is the will. I mean, when there is the will to fight, when there is the resources to fight are available, then the fight becomes easier.
So does this then means that we have come to accept the fact that democratic systems cannot bring stability in African countries? Because there seemed to be some kind of, acceptance of the illegitimacy of coups.
Well, the African ECOWAS, for example, have made it clear, abundantly clear, that coups are not accepted.
Talking about ECOWAS, we saw them give sanction Mali when Mali had its coup.
Yes.
But can they do more than just sanctioning?
Well, first of all, you have to understand they are independent states. Sovereignty, and ECOWAS is a multilateral organization which a state can freely get in but can also exit. And so when you are faced with a bad situation, the first thing, because you're looking at the citizens of Mali, not the junta in Mali itself. When you want to adopt measures or put sanctions and so on, you have to also consider the effect that it's going to have on Malians, ordinary citizens of Mali. Now, when you have targeted sanctions, for example, towards the military leadership, you're trying to tell them that it's unacceptable. You have to prepare and hand over to a democratically elected government within a particular time and so on. But you're also careful to ensure that you do not put too much harm on the way, in doing good, bringing back democracy, you do not also put kind of a principle of do no harm. Now, on the issue of is democracy delivering in Africa or even West Africa, you find out that democracy as we practice it here is not delivering. And now, who do you blame? Do you blame the Democrats? Do you blame the process? Or do you blame the systems that we have? So that is something that you have to look at from one particular country to the other. For me personally, I always feel that it's our leadership recruitment process in a democracy, and that determines so much how that democracy pans out. Do we recruit us in a system in a way that the people feel they owe, or the leaders that are elected owe a duty to the people, or we do it in a way that there are some kind of strong groups that influence whoever becomes the president, and therefore their allegiance is not to the people, but to those cabals, if we accept that, or such groups. And until we are able to fashion out what is the best system to go about, we are able to fashion our leadership recruitment process and our democratic processes, then we will be having a system whereby democracy does not deliver as is anticipated. And if democracy does not deliver, then democracy is at peril, and is going to have these incursions of military from time to time.
All right, so Ali, do we have options here? What will it take to bring stability to the African continent and to end this, coups and on all of that? What would it take to have a strong democracy that can actually deliver and make sure? Or should we just consider perhaps other forms of governance? Maybe democracy is not for Africa.
Well, I think democracy in more ways than one is a cultural thing. And it begins with the mind. Most African, African parents, for example, let me just narrow it down, bring it down home. I remember very well when Obasanjo was Nigeria's president, and he made this, till this moment, to me, it was quite frightening proclamation when he said, look, in Africa, and Obasanjo should know that there is nothing like opposition. Opposition means an enemy, and to him, he must crush his enemy. Now, this is cultural now, because you see, democracy lingers if there is a vibrant opposition. But look at that's why I say the culture here, that people all the time are running to the ruling party, no opposition. And the ruling party would make sure that it precipitates a lot of crisis in the opposition, or find a way to decimate the opposition. Now, what do we do in the absence? What is the way out? How do we ensure stability in the African nation states? Democracy, diarchy, what do we do? We have a combination of the two. Do we go the Egyptian model? You have a military and But you see, even democracy at the global stage is not a one-size-fits-all. The democracy in, say, France is remarkably different from the one in the Great Britain. How do you even qualify the democracy in Great Britain when you have an unelected monarch superintending, taking, certain crucial decisions on behalf of the government? So, and like, look at the democracy in Great Britain, is remarkably different from that of the United States. But it's all democracy. But at the core of democracy is the rule of law, which we don't here, unfortunately, in most African nation states, because of the culture, the psyche of the average African leader is he has this paternalistic attitude. And then we have this culture of gerontocracy, where gerontocrats, we consider it an affront for a young parliamentarian to ask a relevant question to the one heading the executive arm of government. You can imagine if a 30-ish, for example, 30-ish parliamentarian asking to a Generian head of the executive arm, look, how you have not accounted for so and so. That would be taken as an affront, as an insult on the elder. So it's a cultural thing. But
that's how democracies thrive, isn't it? That's how democracies work.
You subject leadership to the relevant questions. You subject leaders, you hold them accountable. In the parliament especially, you ask the relevant questions. When you get to the parliament, look at the Westminster, look at Britain, for example. When Boris Yeltsin was subjected to the crucial, it led to the downfall of his regime. Before him, others do. So it's a cultural thing. And what do we do to do that?
All right,
First is the economy.
Mr. Ali, just hold your thoughts. Very interesting conversation. We'll take a short break now. When we return, the show continues. Please stay.
All right, thank you for staying. You're watching Daybreak on Trust Television. Right here, we are talking about coups, in Africa and across the continent, and the ways forward. We have in the studio Musa Salmanu, an expert in international peace, security, and conflict resolution. He's also former United Nations expert on mission. We have also Ali M. Ali here in the studio, journalist and Deputy President, Nigeria Guild of Editors in the studio. So let me go to Musa Salmanu. How can we move away from here? From the discussions that we have had, it has shown that there's some kind of external influence. Perhaps maybe African countries feel that they cannot deal with the challenges that is in their hands. Specifically, if you look at, say, for instance, the fight against insecurity on the continent, largely there have been increase in the activities of terrorism and all of that. And so some countries or some military forces feel that the best way to secure the country is to take over power and all of that. But again, in taking over power, it doesn't look like the military forces in Africa do not have the capacity or the capability to deal with the security issues, and so they are having to look up to foreign allies to be able to deal with the issues, of insecurity. How can we increase the capacity of our military forces to deal with these issues without necessarily relying heavily on foreign allies?
So I think it's two, let's look at it in two ways. The first one is to recognize that security is not only about physical security, that security is about the welfare and the well-being of the people. And that governments that give more to the welfare and the well-being of the people are more likely to spend less in trying to either arm their militaries and so on and so forth. That when you have people that feel represented, when you have people that feel they are part of the system, they are part of a government, they don't feel left behind. They don't feel, I know you can't, it's almost, but when government makes those efforts, invest in the welfare and the well-being of the people, invest in infrastructure, invest in the, when you look at issue of employment, when you look at issue of out of school, when you look at issue of education, health care, and so on. Those things that we do not give much attention to, those are the bases that we have to start to listen to. When you have that, you have some one problem, which is that is either the immediate or the root causes of those crises, because it's usually it starts with that. People feel neglected, so they protest. They feel protest, the states repress them, the states repress them. So more force is needed to keep them, and therefore more and more it reaches a time that you can't even subdue them and they burst out. And when there is a stabilizer, a destabilizer, all he needs to do is to identify all that and give them more ammunition, more resources, and then boom, the military cannot handle them. That's on one side. Take care of that. Governments must focus on the security of the people, the welfare and the well-being of the people. On the second side is to also professionalize our security services, our security, not only the military. The problem that we have is that we allow issues, initially they are law and order issues. If you look at the entire problems that we have in Nigeria, they started as law and order issues. People doing something, then instead of us treating them maybe in a law and order perspective, we use force. When you respond with force, people respond with more force, and you with more force, so it keeps amplifying and so on and so forth. So when we look at empower those branches of the security that deal with law and order, the police, for example, the security and civil defense, Nigerian security and civil defense, all others that do not apply military force. And they should also understand that policing is not about force. Therefore, so if we adopt that approach of not militarizing policing itself, then we find out that we can solve a lot of these problems without escalating them. Now, when it reaches the military also, so that means in terms of training, in terms of equipping, in terms of adequate number. Number is very important when you come to law and order or when you come to issues of security. Then also sensitizing the public to understand that security is a collective responsibility. Even though I always say that even though it's collective, we all have degree of responsibility. There are people that are saddled with the highest degree of responsibility. That are those that are given the resources and are paid to do that. Okay. Then the community must also come on board.
All right. Ali was talking about, he painted a picture of different sorts of democracies. Is it time Africa started looking at their own concept of democracy? Because it appears as if they did cut and paste. Maybe Africa is time to look inwards and look at the kind of democracy that suits the continent. Do you think so?
You know, long before colonial intrusion, African nation states, in fact, the empires, for example, there are empires that have had the same sophistication as you have in rulership, as you've had perhaps in even Western world. Long before colonial intrusion, the Ashanti Empire, for example, spanned the whole of West Africa. And then if you come nearer home, if you go back, say a place like Kano, for example, before even the Usman Danfodio jihad in 19th century, Kano had a defined political system, a system of taxation. With that, then you look at, but then you see, that is, some people will argue with that it was feudalism. And, but even if you look at it, before the Russian Revolution, we had oligarch, the Tsar was very powerful. And it, perhaps you may disagree with the system because rulers then appropriated so much power to the point that they abused them. But it was a system that was working. But in a modern nation state, what do we do to have an equilibrium? That is a respect to human rights, the right to individual aspiration, to the realization, and a state that works for everyone. Like he was listening, for example, issues of, for example, numerical adequacy. If you want to police a state without necessarily using force. Until recently, until the 7/7 bombing in July 7 bombing in the 2000 in Britain, the average police officer in Britain was not allowed to carry arms because the moment you are seen armed, it presupposes violence. That's the connotation. So now, what do we do in Africa? First, and I think maybe not in this generation, but it's something we have to plan. If you plan, then perhaps they say who he fails to plan, plans to fail. You have to plan, create new generation, and generation that will think first, yes, people right to dissent, to disagree. Disagreeing disagreeably does not mean enmity. You know, it begins with the psyche. If you condition the psyche that, look, there could be other ways. For example now, people always say, look, there are certain things that are non-negotiable. People say otherwise. And then you look at the nature, how the African nation states are brought together, regardless of their history, evolutionary history, because nations like people, they evolve over time, and then they have despairing culture. Over time, for example, till this moment, in the United States, most US citizens see themselves as immigrants. Take away the native Indians. In Nigeria today, you must have some roots somewhere. People are being challenged, notwithstanding that the Constitution says if you are born in the country, you are a citizen. But people will go back because of what he said, depending on the neighborhood. In Africa, most of these nation borders are colonial creation. You understand? The man in, for example, states in the fringes, local government in the fringes, the people in Bakassi, they have more, some people say they have more things in common with the people in Cameroon than they have with the man in Zaria. The man in Daura may have more affinity with the man in Damagaram than the man in Eket in Akwa Ibom. The one I'm saying in terms of cultural affinity. But the nature of colonial penetration has seen the man in Daura and the man in Damagaran, because of the different nature of colonial penetration, the man in Damagaran sees himself as a French man. You understand? Yeah. And this one as an Englishman because of the nature of. So unless we identify our cultural peculiarities and develop a system that will work for these cultural peculiarities, that will work for everyone, perhaps we'll be going around like a Russian roulette.
All right.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much. It's a good place for us to end the discussion. It's been quite an interesting one. For those who are just joining, well, you have missed quite a lot, but not to worry. You can always catch up across all our social media platforms, and we're always on YouTube streaming live, so subscribe to our YouTube channel. And that's a wrap on the show for today. My name is Ayuba Ilya. Our guests have been quite helpful with the discussions. Thank you so much. Musa Salmanu,
Thank you so much.
Wing Commander, retired, and also an expert in international peace, as well as Ali M. Ali, journalist and also Vice President, Nigerian Guild of Editors. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
And that's it.
Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Stella Yaji. Join us same time, same station tomorrow. For now, do have a very pleasant day.
Bye.